Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Recently, I had the pleasure of interviewing renowned writer Susan Silver on behalf of Connecticut's Book Club on the Go and the Wood Memorial Library and Museum in South Windsor. Susan is the author of Hot Pants in Hollywood, Sex, Secrets, and Sitcoms, a feisty, funny memoir chronicling her personal and professional lives and loves and the inevitable intersection of the two. A native of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Susan attended Northwestern University and graduated from UCLA. She began her groundbreaking career as a casting director at Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In before turning her attention to writing. In 1971, Susan penned her first script for The Mary Tyler Moore Show, eventually creating the beloved character Tinks. Her other credits include The Bob Newhart Show, Maude, The Partridge Family, and Square Pegs. Susan currently teaches comedy writing and had a long-running column on NewYorkSocialDiary.com called The Search for Mr. Adequate. She continues to offer radio commentary on Susan Says, which covers news, politics, and culture, and can be heard on an NPR affiliate in Connecticut. Admittedly, this is the much abbreviated version of a long and storied career, but you're about to get some juicy details from Susan Silver herself. As for the rest of it, well, it's in the book.
I'm Cindy DeCanto. I own Book Club on the Go, and I'm here representing Wood Memorial Library, who was kind enough to coordinate this event with the amazing Susan Silver. We're going to introduce her properly. I'm going to let my friend John Valeri, who is the host of his own YouTube channel, Central Booking, which I highly recommend after this event. You go immediately there and subscribe. And they're going to have a little chat, and they're going to ask for your input for sure. So thank you all for joining us. And John and Susan, thank you so much. Take it away.
Thanks, Cindy. Hello, Susan.
Hello, John.
It is delightful to do this with you. So, Cindy said I was going to give you the proper introduction that you deserve, but I decided that I'm not going to do that because, you're used to scripting your own material, and I thought that you might have a couple of
I'm wonderful. I have no underpants on. Oh, I'm sorry. I must apologize. I do have the Fatal Attraction hair. I haven't been to the beauty shop in a year, so it's all white and So that's the introduction.
Well, I like it, and I have to say I would take Fatal Attraction hair over barely any hair. So, you win. And I did debate not wearing underwear tonight, but I had my coffee late in the day, and I'm not really a gambling man. So
TMI, John.
Yes. That should be, I should leave that to you. But anyway,
I told him.
Delighted to talk to you about your memoir, Hot Pants in Hollywood, which people really need to pick up a copy of. And I thought we could start at the beginning. I want to ask you about the title because Hot Pants in Hollywood really is so appropriate on so many levels, personally, professionally. Can you tell us, what the hot pants are and how they sort of encompass this entire narrative? Because they really do.
Well, it was not the way I behaved. It was my wardrobe. Back in the day, and up there somewhere on the wall, there's a picture of me in hot pants. And TV Guide did an article about me. It said the hot pants, the writer wore hot pants, and that was just like a huge thing. And I actually had worn them to a meeting. I'm so sorry, feminists. I who knew back in the day what I was thinking? But yeah, hot pants were like little shorts, and you wore a sweater and boots, and it was very Julie Christie and very hot.
I like it. And it made its way into one of the shows, right? It ended up scripted for a character?
In my one of my Partridge Families, I put Shirley Jones in hot pants in a kind of amusing situation. She's dating a younger guy, and his parents come to complain and visit, and the band was practicing wearing hot pants, and she opens the door, and there she is with the hot pants. So everything I wrote was from my own life. I couldn't make anything up, so.
I love it. I was thinking if I had to classify your book, a couple things come to mind. The old saying, the truth is stranger than fiction. And if I had to distill it down into two words, it would probably be comedy and candor. Those two C words, they're safe C words. But I did want to ask you about that because, this book is very revealing. You talk about a lot of the people that you've met, but obviously there's a lot of self-reflection and assessment as well. And I wanted to ask you about that, the comedy and candor piece, and what it's like to reveal yourself so fully, because usually your words are coming out of somebody else's mouth, but these are, attributable directly to you.
That's such a good question. When I first started writing, I had never, back in the day, we didn't have film writing script classes like they do now and everything. I studied a little at UCLA, but I didn't know that you were allowed to make things up. So I thought every story had to be from my own life. So like after 3 meetings, I didn't have anything to write. I was going through the phone book, airplane. I couldn't think of anything. Then I realized you were allowed to make things up, but I still found that the best things were personal. And when I went to write on Mary Tyler Moore, there was only one other woman, Treva Silverman. So any story I came in with, they thought was amazing. Every woman knows the stories that I told. We've all been asked to stand up for a wedding for someone that we don't like and wear a hideous dress. Twinks. So, that women can relate to. And I just told my own things. In the book, it sounds strange, but when you're writing, you don't think anybody's going to be reading it. So my mom had passed away, my dad had passed away, so I didn't have to keep secrets. I didn't name certain people I protected to save their marriages. No. And I found myself being very revelatory and thinking it should be that way. If you're writing a memoir, you tell the truth and maybe other people will understand and feel the same and connect. And the best thing someone can say to me, I did the audio myself, which was really neat because I can't imagine having an actress read a memoir, read someone else's life. But I started to cry sometimes when I talked about my parents passing and things like that. But the best thing someone can say to me is, oh, I feel like you're just talking to me and we're having lunch. And that's the way I wanted the book to be. So it's very conversational as well as comedic and candory.
Yes,
and,
absolutely.
That's the way it turned out.
Sure. And, you mentioned some of those people who will not be named. Let me just tell people out there is a senator, pick up the book to learn about the senator. Now let me ask you, I want to ask you about humor because I feel like it's one of those things that can be, so subjective. What's funny to you might not be funny to me. I think that I'm a little bit humorous or at least amusing, and my wife says not anybody
we'll let you know, John. We'll let you know.
Well, I'll see it in the comments right there. But I wanted to ask
you the comments without my glasses. What are they saying?
Oh, don't worry, I'll read them for you. Everybody's loving it. They say they love your hair. Love it. It's a hit.
Little rubber rollers. Really, really tight when wet, and then just run your fingers through.
Look at that.
It's going to save me $4,000 a year.
Oh my gosh.
Beauty shop, being gray and setting my own hair. I'm sorry, go on.
No, that's great. Like people are getting all kinds of free advice. This is even more than they thought they were going to get tonight. And actually, before I ask my question, I will say if anybody has a question for Susan, leave it in the chat box, please, because we will definitely get to some of those. But my question for you is about humor. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think the purpose of humor is? And what is sort of your litmus test to know if something is funny enough to share with the general public?
Of course, it's a very specific personal thing. And I've always been funny my whole life to amuse myself. I get bored very easily. And I think when I'm observing people or when I'm anywhere, I find funny stuff. Even when I was in the hospital, in the book, when I almost died twice, I was thinking of funny things to get me through. But it's the only way to go through life is to laugh. You have to. You just have to. And as far as what other people like, you have to know your audience. So on Mary Tyler Moore, there was very women-oriented things, but whenever I spoke back in the day, it was always women and gay guys. I don't know why, but that seemed to be the audience. They loved Mary or whatever. So I never write a joke. Something funny comes to me and I'll put it in. And in situation comedy, and particularly with Jim and Alan, who were our wonderful producers, they didn't want jokes. They wanted character, things out of the characters, things that would just come up. For example, in my first show, which was the aforementioned Twinks, was this bride that asked Mary to stand up for her. She hadn't seen her since camp. My husband then, my ex-husband and I went out looking for houses, and the real estate guy's card, he gave it to me, and it said Arnold Tvedt. And I just started to laugh. I mean, that's a name you can't kill with a stick. Tvedt. You could take out the E, it's still Tvedt. You take out the D, it's still Tvedt. So when the time came for the show, I thought, oh, it's a perfect name, Tvedt. And then what's a funny first name? So that was a really constructed joke, but most of the time it comes out of character. But writers, like I assume other writers, I am extremely fussy. I can watch a show and not laugh, but say out loud, oh, that's funny. And it's like a whole other thing. Very few people make me like laugh out loud hysterical. I can appreciate someone's humor, but I don't laugh easily. I will say, oh, that's funny, or oh, yeah.
Sure. And life really gave you a gift with that name, I gotta say. That's the kind of material that you just have to use. But so you mentioned the Mary Tyler Moore Show, so let's just go there for a couple of minutes, if you don't mind. I did want to ask you, because it's a wonderful story, and I mean, talk about way to break into the industry, really. But that was such a positive experience for you. So can you talk about that experience and sort of, how it weighed out with other experiences that came after that? Because it has to be difficult to have something that's so ideal when you know that not every situation is going to match that.
But I didn't know. You see, I started on top, and I said for the next 22 years, it was downhill ever since that. Gary Marshall, the late, great, wonderful producer director, was my mentor, and he managed young writers. He had a little company, and my partner then, Iris Rayner Dart, who wrote Beaches afterward, she got me to meet him, and we wrote A Love American Style. And then she took a break to have a baby, and I saw this show called Mary Tyler Moore, and it came on mid-season. And I said, Gary, I can write that show. He said, how do you know? I said, she's from Minneapolis, I'm from Milwaukee. It's the same thing. I worked at a local TV station in LA. She worked at a local TV station. I can do it. So he said, all right, I'll call them and I'll tell them you can do it. So because it was Gary, Jim and Ellen said, okay, if we get picked up for the next season, we'll have her in. And I went in and I practiced in front of my ex-husband 4 stories from my own life. And they were so wonderful. And Lorenzo Music and David Davis, the co-producers, were there. And they were very sweet and helpful. And they loved the stories. And they thought I was so different because they hadn't heard those stories. Treva was the only woman there, and all they hear is guy stories, So they thought, oh, this is unbelievable. Little did they know every woman has these stories. So I went in, you pitch the story, they give you ideas, you go home and you write your outline, you turn it in, then you write a first draft, they give you notes, you turn that in, then you write a second draft. And most shows afterward, I found out, that's it, you never see them again. And then they rewrite you and ruin everything you've done. With these guys, they invite you to come to the table reading. They invite you to come to the taping. You're allowed to work with everybody. And it was just the most glorious experience. And I did 5 of them. And then I kind of went on. I didn't do any more episodes. I was doing pilots and movies of the week. But they were the greatest people to work for. And I owe them everything.
Sure. And I have to ask you about Mary Tyler Moore, too, because they say, be careful of meeting your heroes. A lot of times they don't, live up to the expectation. But she seems to have been one of those people who really did live up to people's expectations of her. So can you talk about her personally and, what she meant to you and how she was off screen as well as on screen?
Well, the ultimate irony is when I moved to New York, I moved 2 doors down from Mary. She lived in a building. Literally, there was one building between us, and so I would see her, and her husband then was a doctor. His office was in my building, so it was just a wonderful way to catch up. Mary was just like Mary. I mean, she was extremely sweet, very nice, very private. Didn't talk a lot, but when she had something to say, it was always right. She was very supportive of other women and very easy. I mean, she was just like Mary, which is good because other people are not like the characters they play.
Yeah, absolutely. We've learned that the hard way sometimes. All right. So actually, I'm going to take a real quick question from the chat box so I don't miss them all. But you were talking about, sometimes when you're watching a comedy, you'll say, oh, that's funny, but you won't necessarily laugh out loud. So somebody up here wanted to know what shows do occasionally make you laugh out loud.
I love Veep. I think it was the most clever, fabulous, brilliant writing, brilliant acting. I loved back in the day, Everybody Loves Raymond. I loved He Made Me Laugh. Everything was good. Now, I must tell you, there's not too much that makes me laugh. I laugh at a couple of people on Facebook and Twitter who do parodies and stuff like that. It's not a good time to laugh, and unfortunately, we need to laugh right now. I don't know. What are some other comedies that are on now? I'm watching too much news. I think that's why I'm so depressed. Haven't been out of the house but 11 times once a month for the last year, so I'm I'm not laughing a lot.
No,
Those
that's
two shows
understandable.
I love. I'll give you an example. I shouldn't knock a show, but I'm going to. That's the kind of gal I am. I never got Curb Your Enthusiasm. I can appreciate it and say intellectually, oh, that's clever, that's funny, but it doesn't make me laugh out loud.
Right. Sure. Oh, a recommendation from you, for you from a watcher tonight. Try watching Mr. Mayor, which is the new
Yes.
show with the guy from Cheers. I have not, Ted Danson.
Yeah, Ted Danson. I like it. It's kind of funny. I won't. Somebody on the show annoys me. Let's leave it at that. But I love Ted.
Great. Oh, okay. While we're on Mary Tyler Moore, sort of, we have a comment and a question. So Christine says one of her favorite Mary Tyler Moore episodes that you wrote is A Friend Indeed. So I have to ask a question that always crosses my mind whenever I watch it. I love Rhoda's reaction to Twink's thoughts the whole show, but especially notice how much she flinches every time Twinks touches her. I was wondering if that was written into the script or how those little moments came about.
That's so interesting because I don't remember that. Thank you. That probably came either from Val, who was brilliant and funny, or the director, who was Jay Sandrich. I'll give you an example. On another show I did when Rhoda lost her job and there was a job available at the station and Mary just had mixed feelings about it. Other women would understand it. Maybe you don't want your best friend in your nest in your other place, you know. But anyway, Valerie had one of those old hair dryers on with the tube, and Jay thought of this funny thing where Phyllis comes and takes the thing and blows into it, screams Rhoda. And she was like, oh my God, that was such a funny moment. That and the dress are the two longest laughs ever when Mary comes out in the dress. And but Valerie, you know, they each had different approaches. Mary at the reading would always read it exactly the way you wanted it and exactly the way she was going to do it. Valerie would play around a little and change things. And Cloris, you never knew what she was going to do or say. You never knew if she was going to make the scene or be in there or anything. She just was brilliantly offbeat.
Sure, as we would expect from her. Another question real quick, if you don't mind, about Mary Tyler Moore. So Jamie wants to know if you have a fun memory or story other than those you've shared with already from a table read for that show. Do you remember anything specifically about those table reads that have stuck with you?
No, but I will tell you how lovely she was. I brought my mother once to the set and I was going to introduce her to my mother. And my mother got so nervous. She said, oh, hello, Miss Tyler. Oh. And Mary was so sweet. I mean, somebody else would have said or done something. And she made my mother feel so good. And it was so nice because my poor mother was so embarrassed. So she was just a lovely person.
Oh, that's so nice to hear. And I do move on to a couple other shows because you've done so much writing. So for people who don't know, you know, after Mary Tyler Moore, you worked for the Bob Newhart Show, Maude, as you mentioned, the Partridge Family, Square Pegs. So I am going to throw out a couple of names, you know, for people that you wrote for, and their words, your words came out of their mouth. And if you want to just give, you know, a quick impression or memory of those people, I think that would be great. So I guess why not start with Bob Newhart?
Loveliest person that ever was. And his best friend was Don Rickles. That I never understood, who was not the loveliest person who I worked for and who was very difficult to work for. Bob was the sweetest, nicest guy, and so was Suzanne Plachette. I love Suzanne Plachette. I used to call her a tiny Plesh because that's what a Plachette is, right?
Right.
She had a mouth. She loved to swear and was fun, and I adored them both. They were wonderful. And a little bit later, I was asked to produce the show, but I just, I said yes. And then that night I dreamt I was on an assembly line in Detroit working on cars. So I woke up in the morning, I said, I guess I can't take this job. I can't be at an office in the morning. I can't wake up early. So I didn't do it, but they were great, great people. Sure.
So how about David Cassidy or Shirley Jones, who got to wear the hot pants?
Oh, Shirley was lovely. David, you know, he was younger than I was, so I wasn't a fan, but oh my God, the girls loved him. He was very sweet. And then later, of course, Shirley was great. Most people I worked for, I will say, most people were really good. I mean, Don was difficult because he always had to be the funniest person. So anything you wrote, he wanted to rewrite. Who I loved was Buddy Hackett. He was the best. I did a pilot for him, and we worked at his house in his hot tub. And Buddy Hackett in a swimming suit, you know, that was interesting, but he was a doll. And I did the casting for Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, so that's where I really met everybody, and
Right.
I adored them. They were great, and Goldie, of course, and Artie Johnson, and almost every star, and including Richard Nixon came there. So I met pretty much everybody there.
Sure. And I have to ask you, writing on Maude, I came to love B. Arthur and the Golden Girls. She's one of those people I can just watch all day, and you laugh as much at what she doesn't say as what she does. So do you have any thoughts about her?
Well, that was an interesting experience. First of all, my mother was a little like that. So I said, I can write this. She scares me. And so did my mother. And so I pitched to the producer, Rod Parker, and Norman Lear was the creator. He made it a spinoff of All in the Family. So there wasn't a pilot. So I got the first assignment, which would have been essentially the pilot. And the story was how the daughter is going to the psychiatrist, and Maude says, "Are you going to blame everything on the mother?" And she says, "Of course I am," which is what I said to my mother. So when Norman came back, because it was really the pilot, he did a lot of rewriting, more than most, and he was very lovely to leave my name on it. And so I never went to the table reading or the taping because I didn't feel it was really me, other than the story was mine. But she was intimidating.
I've heard, and very shy and sort of eccentric in her own way. So I know a lot of people, felt like they weren't really.
She was shy.
So I hear. I never had the pleasure of meeting her, but could be wrong. And I have to ask you too, someone who's a little bit more celebrated now, Sarah Jessica Parker. She was in Square Pegs, right? Was that it?
She was, and that was a real weird experience. In fact, TV Guide did an article about it, and what happened was the executive producer and a bunch of people came from Saturday Night Live, and they were all younger, and I was brought in by the studio to be the veteran, calm them down, and they were all, and I didn't know it, and finally I just went and played tennis. I mean, I was hardly there because they were acting in a way that and they didn't like me either, so.
Sure.
But Sarah was great. She was great. And then I met her when she was going with, I think it was Robert Downey Jr. again at a convention, a Democratic convention, and she certainly made a life for herself.
Yeah, right?
Shoes and all, yeah.
All right, so this book really is sort of like a veritable who's who. There are so many names, so many people, and not all from, working with them, writing for them. So I'm going to throw out a couple more names, that come up throughout the book. Don't worry, I think for the most part, they're pretty safe. But again, if you wouldn't mind sharing, a quick impression or memory, because
I don't do impressions. I don't know how. I don't know how to do an impression, but I'll try. Okay.
So, Elvis.
Yes. I was in college and I was an extra in the movies, and I was in Viva Las Vegas. And there's a scene where I was a showgirl and I had like gold and a thing on my head. And there's a scene where he and Ann Margaret are at a pool table and I walk by, and that was it. I didn't have any lines or anything, but I'm in the movie. So after that day, he had this, what did they call them? The mafia, the Southern mafia guys around him, his 6 guys that always hung around with him. And they came up to me and they said, "Elvis is having a party tonight. Would you like to come?" I said, "Oh yeah, thank you. Where do I go?" And they, Bel Air, whatever. And I was living at my uncle's house. My uncle was in showbiz. He was a writer and a producer named Cy Howard. And he said, "You're not going." And I said, "Why?" He said, "I'm not going to let you go to Elvis's house." I said, "I'm going." So I left early. I was supposed, let's say the party was 7. So around 6:45, I drive in, I press the gate, I go in. There's nobody there, and there's only one car, and it's Elvis's car. So I go out, and then at 7:30, I come back in. There's still only one car there. So I knew that it was just going to be a party with me and Elvis, so I left.
Sure. Fair enough. How about Steve McQueen?
Steve McQueen. They have to read the book. How's that? I had 3 instances with Steve McQueen. One I'll tell you about. I was an extra again in a movie called Baby, the Rain Must Fall. And because we were dancing and doing the twists, and I was a dancer back in the day, they said, "We need you to go teach somebody how to do the twist." I said, "Fine, who?" They said, "Steve McQueen." I said, "Okay." So I had on like a bikini, I think, and I went into the dressing room. I knocked, he opened the door, and he was sitting there on the couch playing a guitar. And I was beyond nervous. And I think I went, that's the twist. And that was the end of that. But I did meet him 2 times after. And we had a, you'll see.
Yeah, those stories are in the book. All the more reason to buy it. And Jim Morrison, too. You know, you met a very different Jim Morrison than the world came to know.
Jim Morrison was one of my really good friends at college at UCLA. He was very different. He wasn't the Jim Morrison you knew. He had like that little haircut where your mother puts the bowl across around your head. And he was very shy. He was a poet. We used to hang out at the food truck outside the theater arts. And we had 2 friends who were very mature and advanced, a guy named Max and a gal named Liz. And Max wore all black leather and had long hair, and they smoked a lot of grass. They rode motorcycles, and we were like the 2 little virgins following them around. And then that's the persona that Jim took. And later, when I was doing research for the book, I read that Max was a very big poet, Max Schwartz. He was a beatnik poet in San Francisco. That's what became of him. But Jim was a wonderful, wonderful guy, sweet as could be.
Sure. Oh, question. I was going to ask you this, but somebody else wants to know as well. Jamie wants to know what it was like hearing Ed Asner say your name at the Emmy Awards after he won.
Ed Asner is my love, my honey. I love him. I adore him. I wrote a script where after his wife leaves him, she takes all the furniture and he has to redecorate his apartment. So Mary suggests that she hire Rhoda to do it. And Rhoda does this very modern avant-garde thing and he hates it. And he really hates it. And she comes in and he looks at her and he says, I love it. I love it. But she leaves the room. He says, I hate it. I hate it. Anyway, he won an Emmy. And my husband and I went to the Emmys then. And he mentioned my name and my mother was very happy.
Oh, yeah, that's got to be like, pinch me, did this really, really happen? So I want to ask you, too, you know, the reality is that writing for television or even film or theater, a lot of times, you know, you put in a lot of work with no guarantee that it's going to come to fruition. So a lot of people see it as this magical experience, and it can be, but it's also a lot of hard work that doesn't really go anywhere. So can you talk about how you find sort of the fortitude to continue in such an uncertain industry?
I didn't. I quit. It's called Development Hell. I wrote for 22 years. I sold 15 pilots. None of them sold. I wrote 15 movies of the week. 2 of them were made. I did 5 features. None of them were made. Episodes are the only things that get made. And I stopped doing them my second year. So in 1989, we had a Writers Guild strike and I moved to New York and I realized I didn't want to do it anymore. It's very debilitating. I mean, you can make a lot of money. I never was in it for the money. You want to be in the experience. You want to hear your words. You want to be, you know, at the show. So it's difficult. And it's very, very hard now. It's much harder if you're past a certain age. I mean, you can't get a job at all. And very small percent of the writers work. It's a tough business. Except now there are all these other avenues you can write for, you know, with the internet and stuff. So that's the plus side. But it's hard. And frankly, I write about the 3, aside from the showbiz and the fun and the baby boomer stuff in my book, the themes are really, I call the 3 R's. Resilience, which I never thought I had, but I found out I do. Reinvention, which I think you have to do every 20 years. And I did other careers after. And relationships, which are the most important. And I don't have children. And so I've adopted some soldiers in Israel and they're my family. I have a godchild and they're my family. And I sort of attack babies on the street and ask if I can hug them. And it's very strange, but I love babies. So resilience is something you really need in the business. It's a very, very tough business. And I didn't think I was. Had I not started on Mary Tyler Moore, I started on top and I had a ton of amazing publicity because of it and everything, because of those hot pants. And so I don't know that I would have made it if I had to struggle like other people do.
Sure.
Or did.
And people are saying they're going to live vicariously through you. Can't wait to read the book. You have no idea. This is just like, you know, the tip of the iceberg, Jill. You're going to love the book. But let me ask you this as well. I mean, television is so different now in terms of the writing. You know, when you began, you could sort of sell a script on spec, whereas now there's, writers' rooms, and it's not really open to the layperson who says, hey, I want to take a crack at writing an episode of this show that I really, really love and understand. So can you talk a bit about how the industry, has changed and what advice you might give to people who are maybe looking to try to break in some way?
See, back in the day, we didn't have writers' rooms. We came into a meeting with the producers and the story editors. As I said, you do your work, you go home, you write it, you do that. They're all in a room together. It used to be variety shows did that. When I moved to New York, I was standing in line at the movies. I ran into Lauren Michaels. He said, oh, I'm doing this new show. I had known him. He was a writer on Laugh-In. He said, you want to write for it? I said, what is it? He said, it's called Saturday Night Live, and we're going to have such fun. And I said, is it a variety show? He said, yeah. I said, I don't want to be in a room with other writers where you have to really fight for your lines and everybody's screaming and laughing and everything. So every show has writer rooms now. They hire a limited number of people. That's why there's so many people that aren't working. It's not for me. I don't think I could have done it. And also the ageism thing. I had a partner that I wrote a movie with when I moved to New York, and he would go in, he had written a lot of things and top series. He would go in with his son, and they would say, let your son talk. You can go home and do the writing. I mean, that's how ageist it is. So it's a tough business. I would say now, you have to start in these ancillary things, all the internet stuff. And if you're going to be a comic, go to the clubs and all of that stuff, because it's a very different game right now in the Writers Guild. I don't know what percent of people work now. I can't imagine.
Sure. So, and actually to scale back a bit, instead of talking about the industry now, I want to ask you also about when you began, because, it's sort of the old boys network. Were you aware of, how limited the roles were for women at that time? What were the challenges like? And I'm assuming, in retrospect, you can probably appreciate more how groundbreaking your career, really was and is. So would you mind reflecting on that for a moment?
At the time, as I said, there were two women writers. Treva Silverman wrote comedy, and I'm blanking on the other one, Joanne, I'm so sorry, I'm blanking on her name. And I didn't know what the situation was, but Iris was managed by Gary, and Gary was the hottest thing. He had at the time, I think he had The Odd Couple. And so when I saw the Mary Tyler Moore Show, I knew that I could do it. Iris and I had gone to pitch it, and we sold the show to That Girl. And unfortunately, it was about her getting married to Donald, and Marla was in charge of everything. She was the first real tough, strong woman in television, and she decided that it wouldn't be good for the character to get married. So they bought our script, they paid for it, but they didn't use it. And so my first appointment was in Mary Tyler Moore, and they wanted women. And after me, they hired, I think, like 25 women. So I had no idea that it was a problem to be a woman in the business. And I must say, I led this sort of charmed existence. And as I say, had I known, I probably wouldn't have succeeded, but I was very, very lucky. Now, even in drama, there aren't as many women, and there certainly aren't as many women directors. There certainly aren't as many minorities. So it's a constant fight, but ageism is the new ism.
Right. And you even mentioned in your book, and I guess I probably responded to it just because I grew up on, Golden Girls, because I'm an 80s boy myself, but how, even now, as successful as that show was, and I think it seems to be more successful now than it even was, when it first was on the air.
I pitched so many shows about older women. I mean, I'm between 50 and death myself.
Yes.
So I know my audience, and they just don't want to hear it. Because they're mostly men. Now there's some women executives, but the problem was that they were mostly men executives. And now there are some women. But it's, it's a constant thing. And as I say, I think that the female end of it has gotten much better. The minority end is getting a little better, but the ageism thing is bad. It's bad.
Yeah, it absolutely
and
is.
We're also dying more of COVID, so I've got to go now. No, I'm sorry.
It's true. And it's like, why do we not value?
I had my shot today. I had my first shot today. That's why I'm not moving my left arm. It didn't hurt at all.
Well, that's something hopeful and positive. That's wonderful.
It was fabulous. Yeah.
I'm so glad. All right, I got to ask you this. So it's so funny because oh no, this will probably be an easy one for you. Nothing objectionable, I don't think, but it's funny because, we're all celebrating your storied career in the comments section here, and reading your book, it's, wow, she was really a groundbreaking pioneer, whether or not you realized it. But you repeatedly sort of talk about yourself, as lazy, and you do this for a while and you do that for a while. But I want to ask you, balancing personal and professional lives, because if you read this book, I mean, you get a lot of both. So how do you balance the two and learn to, prioritize and reprioritize just what it is that might make you happy?
Well, I was married so I was with my husband 10 years. We were married 7 years when I started writing. And so he would help me. His name was Arthur Silver. And I would pitch stories to him and he would laugh, whatever. And then he was a stockbroker and he decided he didn't want to do it anymore. So I said to Gary, he's really funny. And he hired him as a junior writer when he was not a junior. And he became the producer of Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley. So there you go. How I handled it, I got a divorce. I mean, you can't do both. No, you can have a career. I didn't have children, which made it a lot easier, of course. Life is always more important to me. When I say I'm lazy, I'm very focused when I do my work. I used to work at night, 7 to 11, which is probably why I am divorced. That's when I can think straight. I can't think in the morning. I can't wake up in the morning. And in the afternoon, I like to work out or lie in the sun or whatever. Sure. So I like to work at night. But I can stay. I was an only child. I lived inside my head. I'm a writer. I can amuse myself and I love to read. So I have been social distancing before it was cool. I was in the house for the last 20 years before COVID. So no one, my life isn't any different than it always was. Somebody interviewed me. They're doing a book on introverts and extroverts. And they felt that I was like in between. I think it's called ambiverts. Maybe that's naughty. I don't know. No, ambiverts. I can be with people when I go to a conference or something, be with them every day. And then I have to come home and be by myself for like 2 weeks and not talk to anybody and just. Mm-hmm. So I think it's up to everybody. I think if you have kids, it's very tough. And it certainly is tough now for working mothers. I feel for them. And the best thing to do is take a hot bath, put music on, put a candle and just relax. You got to give yourself some you time.
Sure, absolutely. And I'm going to ask you this as well. So you mentioned before your 3 R's, and one of them was reinvention. And you say, about every 20 years. So we've talked a lot about your work in television, but, you've done columns, you've done radio. So can you talk about some of those reinventions and some of the things that you have done since then and are doing now?
Yeah, Gary Marshall, who was my best friend, said that I was a hyphenate. In show business, you're a writer/director or an actor/waiter, usually. But he said I went to work for Holocaust-related things, and I was a UN observer for the Simon Wiesenthal Center. So he said I was a Nazi hunter/sitcom writer. So when I moved to New York, I took a year off. I was very fortunate that I could do that. And I networked with everybody I knew or people who gave me names to find out what I wanted to do. And I realized that I wanted to be involved with Holocaust and Israel. And I went to work for the Anti-Defamation League. I set up a speakers bureau and I went to Washington. I was involved in politics, so I could do that a lot. And that was great. And that's when I met Bill Clinton and a lot of different senators, Kennedy and everybody. And then I was the UN observer for the Wiesenthal Center for 7 years, just as a volunteer. And that was a difficult, very unpleasant experience because I love Israel. I have 3 soldiers there and UN is not a very Israel-friendly place. Then I go to these things called Renaissance weekends where you're invited to come and talk about your field. And there's all kinds of people from astronauts, scientists to comedy writers. And 2 people came and they said, we have a radio thing. Would you like your own radio show? I said, yeah, why not? So I did a commentary 3 times a week now, because I'm lazy. I do it once a week on Robin Hood Radio, WHDD out of Connecticut. It's the smallest NPR station. And I do my little commentaries called Susan Says, and I do culture, media, and things that piss me off. And the things that piss me off, it's called Oh Come On. And it usually has to do with noise. because I have severely good hearing. I have something called misophonia. I can hear everything, everywhere, at all times, and it's really annoying. So
Yeah, that's
and I live in
unfortunate.
New York.
But you will not run out of material. All right, so we're about 40 minutes in, so maybe we'll go another 5 or 10 minutes if you don't mind, and we'll take a couple extra questions as well. But I did think I'd bring up Valentine's Day. You know, I'm wearing my red tonight, and I see that you have some hearts behind you there.
My godchildren sent me the greatest Valentines.
Those are beautiful.
Yay!
And they're so proactive.
That's the only thing I'm going to be doing. I mean, I did it one time. I did the Today Show, and it was on Valentine's Day, and there was a panel, and Hoda Kotb said, you know, what do you want to say about Valentine's Day? And I had on a black dress and a necklace. It was in the morning. I said, I'm in mourning for my social life because I'm single yet again. I did have a dating column called The Search for Mr. Adequate, because there's no prince and there's no perfect, and I haven't found him yet. So I'm doing nothing for Valentine's Day. Hello. And I like chocolate, and I like champagne, and I like caviar. Hello.
All right, people, leave your propositions in the comment section. You'll pick out the ones you like the best, perhaps.
I can't see them. Thank God. Without my glasses, I can't see the comments. Maybe I should look and see.
We'll read them back to you after, you know, we're not live anymore, and then we'll have a lot of fun with that.
Okay.
But I did want to ask you, you know, in some sense, the book really is sort of a multifaceted love story. It's a story about how sort of you've come to know and really appreciate yourself, you know, the men who've been in your life, and also sort of this family, this beautiful family, this sort of unconventional family that you've made for yourself later in life. So can you talk about that as a theme throughout the book?
I was an only child. As I said, I don't have family. Both my parents have passed on, and I don't have, you know, anybody. And so I have this devotion for babies because I guess I didn't have one. I don't know what, but when I see a baby on the street, I'm like drawn to them. And so I was at this Renaissance weekend, and I was on a panel with this very attractive guy, and we were talking about mistakes in our life. And my mistake was how I turned down Clint Eastwood and Steve McQueen for dates. And his was a really serious story about his baby, who was a heart issue and all this stuff. And then the baby came, and I looked at the baby, and I couldn't stop looking at the baby. I fell in love with the baby, and the baby looked at me. So I said, can I hold her? I picked her up. She started to kiss me here, and we all started to cry. She's now my godchild, Elle. Her name is Elle. And then I go to Israel a lot because I'm very involved there. And I met some extraordinary kids. I'm involved with the Friends of the Israel Defense Force, where you go and you meet the actual soldiers. And I and another friend of mine adopted 3 soldiers. We sent them to college. And now they're all out of the Army, and they're all working. They have wives and babies. So they're my 3 grandchildren, I guess, families. And so I've manufactured family. And it's so important to have relationships, and it's the most important.
Sure. I think that's, you know, amazing. And I think that we see that more and more people, you know, who create their own families, either because they don't have family or they don't get along with their family. But that's probably a conversation, you know, for another time. And speaking of Valentine's too, I just wanted to mention really quick that, you know, there's a great subtitle here, Sex, Secrets, in sitcoms. There is a comma between sex and secrets, but there probably doesn't have to be. I mean, people who are looking for some advice, I mean, all you have to really do is read the prologue.
Well, it's a good book to buy for your mothers who like Mary Tyler Moore Show for Valentine's Day, or your wives, or your girlfriends, or your gay guy friends.
Absolutely. All right. So I am going to pick out a couple more questions from this little chat box, if you don't mind. And actually, you have some other comments here. Susan, you look gorgeous. Can't disagree with that.
My best friend wrote that, probably. Thanks, Lynn.
It's good to have friends, isn't it? Hey, that's not Lynn. Look at you. I believe somebody wanted to know what it was like to work with, there it is, Marlo Thomas.
Oh, you know, the sad thing is we never got to work with her, but I did meet her later because we had a mutual friend, and she's amazing. And of course, married to Phil all these years. And she was the first. She was the first woman executive, and she could make all the decisions, and it was terrific. She was the beginning of it. I mean, really, that girl was the precursor to Mary.
Sure. And Christine wants to know, what do you think of how comedy has changed now and what's allowed versus what isn't allowed anymore? There are so many jokes I hear on Mary Tyler Moore that I love and are so funny, but I know they wouldn't fly on TV today. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, like what? Like what?
I don't know. Let's see, Christine, what is it that you've heard that you don't think would fly now?
I think it's the opposite, honey. I mean, back in the day, they had to sleep in separate beds. Even you couldn't say like abortion, and you couldn't do anything. Now you can say and do anything. I don't know what you couldn't do now.
Sure. And somebody else wanted to know, somewhere in this comment box, there was a question about if you have a favorite project that you worked on, if there's a script that is still nearest and dearest to you as the favorite one.
I have two. Thank you for asking. Do you have any money? We could still do them. One was a movie of the week called What Are You Doing New Year's Eve? And it was about 5 women who were together New Year's Eve because they were going with married guys. I don't know where that idea came from. The other one was a real true story that I wanted Ed Asner to be in so much. On 60 Minutes, they did a show about women during the World War II war who had affairs with American GIs in London, and then they had babies, and the GIs didn't know. And there was a real story about a woman who tracked down the father of her daughter, and I went to interview her. I went to London, and I rode on a train to Manchester, and it was such a great story, and it would have been such a great story. They meet later, like 40 years later, and I always wanted Ed to be the father, but we couldn't get it made.
Sure. And I just want to say, you mentioned before when we were talking about how so much, work goes into things that may or may not be made. And you were saying, you worked on all these television movie projects and only 2 of them were produced. But I think that we should tell people that both of them were top 10 rated, right?
Yeah, they were. That's the frustration. They were 2 top 10 comedies. The Couple Takes a Wife, which was a story about if my husband and I were to hire someone to be my assistant. It was Valeri and it was Bill Bixby was the husband. And the other one, the girl who came gift wrapped with someone I adore and love and remain friends with, Karen Valentine, about a guy who gets a girl as a birthday present from his friends. He's a bachelor of 40. And there were very few comedies, and they both were top 10, but it was really hard to get them made. I mean, it was tough. Also, I never was with a company. I never signed like with MTM. I should have, and I was always a freelance person. So that was harder then.
Sure. And we have a question in this fun Ask a Question box. So Jessica wants to know what you think about all of the reality TV shows that are on now. And do you ever think that you could write for a reality show? I don't think there's all that much writing that goes into them, is there?
Well, I'm starting to think there's more than we know. I used to love The Bachelor. I watched it all the time in The Bachelor. This season, I am so angry. I'm on the website on Facebook of The Bachelor complaining all the time. This really attractive, nice guy, they have screwed around. They bring in new girls. They bring in phony girls that aren't real, who are obnoxious. This hideous, obnoxious girl who called herself, what was her job? The Queen. That was what she was, a queen. And she was so obnoxious and she was toxic to the other girls. They finally got rid of her. They're making drama where there shouldn't be. As far as other reality shows, my guilty pleasure is watching the housewives of different cities. And yeah, they're fun.
Well, this might go hand in hand with a question we have here from Sarah, who wants to know, how do you pass your time in quarantine, other than The Bachelor and The Real Housewives?
It's so pathetic. Sarah, it's so pathetic. I sleep. I read. I watch the news way too much. I'm excited about the impeachment, so I'm watching every minute of that. And I do have a garden, which I'm very fortunate in New York. And so when the weather was nice, I would go sit out there and have coffee and read the newspaper. I Skype with my families, and I sleep.
But do you sleep?
No.
I have to say, minus the news, that's like my ideal life right there. I'm like, books and more sleep. Yes.
Good.
Please. All right. I am just about done. But
so fun.
Oh, hey, we can keep going if you want to. But actually,
sure.
I think we have, let's see, somewhere here, Christine sort of got back to us about the jokes that she thought might not fly on television anymore. And I'm thinking that she might be talking about like network TV, like ABC, CBS, versus, the more cable shows or Netflix where you really can pretty much say or do anything. But she was saying, she doesn't think that, jokes about midgets, married men having affairs, things like that. She said maybe she doesn't think those would fly like they might have in the past.
Oh, I do. I think they do. Gary Marshall always used to put little people, we call, in shows because they make people laugh, and when they're very talented actors as well. And and there's all kinds of shows about little people now. Their own reality shows. I think you can get away with anything now, and I think you can get away with too much. Probably.
Sure. And I think back in the day, it was great. The humor could be so suggestive. And then you think about it today when you watch a rerun and you're like, wow, they really got away with something there. And it's hysterical. I love that.
Well, one of the people in my book, as you know, who has his own chapter, who I worship and adored, was Lenny Bruce, whose mother fixed me up with him, if you can believe that, in college. And of course, he broke so many barriers, and he was persecuted and prosecuted for it and wound up, in jail a lot of times for it. And now people in comedy clubs can say or do anything. So I think it's changed, probably for the better.
Sure. All right. Well, this has been delightful. And before I let you off the hook, I do have to ask you, you've done so much in your life and times, but is there anything that you're working on now or any, creative ambitions that you have left, something that you might still want to accomplish that we should be looking for?
I forgot what I've been doing most of all, believe it or not, is needlepoint. It's so frightening. I used to do it all the time. Hold on, don't go away. Ta-da! I love butterflies. I have done 6 needlepoint pillows for friends and 2 for myself. And that's what I'm doing all the time. It's so good. It's relaxing. It takes your mind off things. You can watch stuff and do it, and it's fun. But as far as writing and creating, no, I complain a lot on Twitter, and on Facebook, I try to be amusing, and that's about it. And
that's
sweet.
Great. And gotta tell you, so Jamie, all capitals, you do amazing needlepoint work. She really likes it, and you're, oh wow, so pretty, beautiful, love it. Man, you should sell those. That must be your next.
Yes, I'm going to start selling my needlepoint, and I'm looking for a husband. I forgot to say that.
Well, there you go. So looking for a husband,
more than adequate, somebody more than adequate.
I like it. And, before we go, we should, again, remind people that they should pick up the book. Love this cover. But if people are looking...
wonderful Joey Heiberg, my wonderful illustrator, has a line of dolls called Joey's Dolly Mamas, and she did the greatest cover. I loved it because it couldn't use the photo from the TV guide because we didn't own it. So she did a great job.
It's awesome.
She made my legs a little thin, but she made my boobs nice and big. Or maybe it's the reverse. I can't
remember. The reverse.
She made my boobs small and made my legs okay.
We'll have to talk to her about that. Oh, you'll appreciate this commentary. Okay, so Cheryl says, Susan, you are wonderful, and husbands are overrated. My wife would probably agree.
No, I want one. It's time for a second one. I've been divorced for 100 years.
Oh, so it's time. So maybe that's your next great adventure.
But when you're wearing a mask, it's so hard.
It really is. And we should let people know, if you want to buy a copy of the book, there are a couple ways that you can get it. There is a buy a signed copy button right down at the lower portion of your screen. You can also link to the book through Susan's website, or you can go to, I believe it's BookBaby, and you can find it that way. So the book is all over the place. You can get it hard copy.
Get it from us. Get it from this bookstore, which is so wonderful.
Yes, that would really be the way to do it. Support Cindy, support Susan. It's a great Valentine's Day gift, or even belatedly. But Susan, I want to thank you so much. It was a real pleasure. You were a dynamo. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. You were fun too.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.